The house reverberated with a different kind of silence, a loud, uncomfortable silence that echoed through the large rooms with a foreboding sense of permanence. She straightened her coat as her eldest son, now the new Lord Frampton, stepped into the hall from the drawing-room. "What are they doing in there, David?" she asked, trying to contain her grief, at least until she got to the church. "We're going to be late." David gazed down at her sadly. "We can't be late, Mum," he said, his dark eyes full of the same pain. "Dad's... you know..." He looked to the window. "No, you're right, of course." She thought of George in the hearse outside and felt her throat constrict. She turned back to the mirror and began to fiddle with her hat again. "Still, everyone will be waiting, and it's frightfully cold." A moment later, her middle son, Joshua, emerged from the drawing-room with his chilly wife, Roberta. "You okay, Mum?" he asked, finding the emotion of such an occasion embarrassing. "Just keen to get on with it," David interjected impatiently. Joshua thrust his hands into his pockets and hunched his shoulders. The house felt cold. He went to stand by the hall fire where large logs entwined with ivy crackled in the grate. "What are they doing in there?" his mother asked again, glancing towards the drawing-room. She could hear the low voice of her youngest son, Tom, and her mother-in-law's formidable consonants as she held forth, as usual unchallenged. "Grandma's demanding that Tom show her how to use the mobile telephone he gave her," Joshua replied. "Now? Can't it wait till later?" Her chin trembled with anguish. "They're finishing their drinks, Antoinette," said Roberta with a disapproving sniff. "Though I'm not sure Tom should be drinking with his history, should he?" Antoinette bristled and walked over to the window. "I think, today of all days, Tom is entitled to consume anything he wants," she retorted tightly. Roberta pursed her lips and rolled her eyes at her husband, a gesture she wrongly assumed her mother-in-law couldn't see. Antoinette watched her arrange her pretentious feather fascinator in front of the mirror and wondered why her son had chosen to marry a woman whose cheekbones were sharp enough to slice through slate. At last, Tom sauntered into the hall with his grandmother, who was tucking the telephone into her handbag and clipping it shut. He smiled tenderly at his mother, and Antoinette immediately felt a little better. Her youngest had always had the power to lift her high or pull her low, depending on his mood or state of health. A small glass of wine had left him none the worse, and she ignored the niggling of her better judgment that knew he shouldn't consume any alcohol at all. Her thoughts sprang back to her husband, and she recalled the time he had managed to telephone her from the Annapurna base camp just to find out how Tom was after a particularly bad week following a breakup. She felt her eyes welling with tears again and pulled her handkerchief out of her pocket. George had been a very good man. "You haven't turned the heating off, have you?" exclaimed the Dowager Lady Frampton accusingly. "I never let it get so frightfully cold." In her long black dress, wide black hat, and mink stole, Margaret Frampton looked as if she were off to crash a Halloween party rather than attend her only son's funeral. Around her neck, wrist, and dripping from her ears like elaborate icicles was the exquisite Frampton sapphire suite, acquired in India in 1868 by the first Lord Frampton for his wife Theodora and passed down the generations to George, who had loaned it to his mother because his wife refused to wear such an extravagant display of wealth. The Dowager Lady Frampton had no such reservations and wore the jewels whenever a suitable occasion arose. Antoinette wasn't sure Margaret's son's funeral was quite such an occasion. "The heating is on, Margaret, and the fires are all lit. I think the house is in mourning too," she replied.